Overcoming abuse doesn't just happen. It takes positive steps every day. Let today be the day you start to move forward. Speak out. Break the silence. Get help. Stop the violence.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Camelia Capraro, and today in Diaspora TV, we speak about a subject, a very interesting subject, domestic violence. Our title of the show is named Speak Out, Break the Silence, Get Help, Stop the Violence. I am honored to have today in the studio two guests, which is Daniela Valdevia here with me, which is lawyer, and Liliana Tinoco Beckart, which is integration expert. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you so much.
I would like to ask you how you define domestic violence and which are the type of domestic violence.
Well, domestic violence is always given within a sentimental relationship. It has to have partners that are the intimate partners or ex-intimate partners where this can happen. Like you have to be aware that domestic violence cannot happen outside these subjects. It can also include children. It could also include, of course, other members of the family that live in the same household. And I could say, depending on the legislation and depending on the country, we have several different, many types of domestic violence. But the most important I could mention is physical abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, and sexual abuse.
Thank you very much. I would like to add too that in 2020 in Switzerland was reporting the more than 90,000 cases of domestic violence, and at the same time 29 people was killed. So Liliana, would you like to add something else related with the types and with the definition of domestic violence?
So I wrote a book in 2020 about binational marriages. I was researching about Brazilian women marrying foreigners from 19 different nationalities. And I could perceive that many men go to countries like Brazil or South America or Africa, poor countries where they can find women in vulnerability. And they bring these women to their countries, and it would be also Switzerland. And they use this vulnerability to apply, to use domestic violence in all senses that Daniela already explained. So it's because if you are a foreigner, and especially if you just arrived in a country, it's much easier for these men to humiliate, to use all forms of domestic violence. It would be more difficult for him to do it maybe with a Swiss lady that has her networking, her family here. Of course, I'm not saying that Swiss ladies are not exposed to it, but I'm just saying that if you have a foreigner wife, more vulnerable, she's more vulnerable. She could be more vulnerable to it.
Okay, thank you very much. For example, because you are a lawyer, related with the legislation, do you think here in Switzerland the legislation it's enough good to cover and to protect the victims?
Well, I would say that all the legal instruments are there. They have, like in Switzerland, we have a lot of institutions that help women in such situations. We have a lot of civil society institutions that speak more than 10 languages and can help precisely victims from other countries. But the thing is that if we don't talk about this, if we don't make it visible, because if it's something that we think only a certain kind of women with no education, with no resources are experiencing violence, or if we think maybe it only happens with couples that are binational, then it's a topic that nobody is interested on. So I would say the instruments are there, but what is missing is maybe raising awareness on the topic and making sure that everyone understands what can be violence and what not. What can be an offense, a legal offense, and what is not. That's something maybe we are missing.
I understand that here in Switzerland, if somebody want to claim an act of violence, where they can do it, and how they can do it.
Well, any person is free to call the police when you are being a victim yourself, or even if you are a neighbor or you are a family member that you have listened to something, or you have the feeling that someone is experiencing domestic violence, you can always call anonymously, or you can call openly, saying your name, and you can say the address, say where is these people. You don't even need to mention the names, but police should be taking place there and starting an investigation.
117.
117, the police number, and you can always also say, I don't speak the language and I would need an interpreter.
Okay. I understood that you was a victim of domestic violence. Can you tell us more about your experience?
Well, I was victim of domestic violence myself, not here in Switzerland, but it was the same situation. I married another, well, a person not from nationality. I don't want to mention it.
Yeah.
Here in Europe, and I experienced violence. And I was isolated. I didn't have access to the city, even. We were living in the countryside. I didn't have a car to move. Like, there was no public transport that would reach the region where I was living. I didn't have a phone. I was not able to make a call. So I would say, when you were in such position, although I was speaking already German, when you were in such position, you were more vulnerable, and you are more easy target to experience violence. That's why I would suggest, and maybe that's also another topic we would like to hear from you, that if you are coming to Switzerland or to any other country within a relationship, you better know numbers of institutions, you create your network, you make friends with your neighbors, you inform your family where you are, you try to integrate into society, so that if anything happened to you or anything is starting to happen to you, you can talk about it, you can speak up.
And you are not so vulnerable.
Yes.
Liliana, from your experience doing interviews with the women from different nationalities, what you can say about it?
Well, I've heard lots of good stories, beautiful stories, but also horrible stories. Very violent men, so men who really want to humiliate these women and make their lives miserable. And I heard as well, continuing what Daniela was saying, it's very good, don't give your passport to this man, because you can, even inside a marriage, be a victim of human trafficking. Because these men, I've heard men who oblige these women because they don't want to give money. They oblige them to work as a prostitute, and they take the passport, and they cannot even run away because the passport is with them. But you can go to the consulate and they can make a new passport for you. It's very useful to, before you go with the number of the passport. You go, the telephone number. Don't give your passport, and try to, as soon as you get to the country, make friends in your language and start asking about those information.
And I think nowadays it's much more easy, because if you are connected to social media, you have different groups from different nationalities. Almost all the migrants here in Switzerland, they have their own group in Facebook. Then you can be participant of one Facebook group, and then there you can ask people about
if
it.
the man doesn't take your cell phone,
Yeah.
because some men, they isolate the victim and she has no contact at all. They give the cell phone that she can call the family, but they take the phone back. So I think if you have your cell phone, then it's much better. You're not isolated.
For example, from your experience, did you see that some one moment, I will put it again. For example, from your experience, did you see that some groups, migrant groups, are more violent than others? This can be a characteristic to differentiate cultural background or something like that?
You mean the husbands, right?
Not necessary, because I think sometimes not just women are victims, men can be as well. I
You
know
mean the
cases.
perpetrators?
Yes, the perpetrator. So the abuser can be any sex, sometimes can be reverse way. We know from statistics that in general the woman is the victim and the man is the perpetrator or the abuser. But for sure are cases reverse way. And if from your research you saw, for example, one community, one migrant group, they are more abuser than others, or women are more to be victim than others. So.
I couldn't say that one group is more violent than the other, because I have seen Swiss men, German men, and French. I have seen lots of different cases, and when you think, oh, this society is so peaceful, no. And also, I cannot say that women that have maybe less education, I mean, go to school, less years of school.
So education is not a factor either
It's
to be
not,
a victim or not?
Unfortunately. I think they are more targeted, the countries where you have more social vulnerability. But it also happens with people with lots of studies.
Yeah, maybe here is important to mention that when I married this person, it was 5 years ago when I went through domestic violence. I've already done a lot of job, like experience in domestic violence as an activist. I founded my NGO 11 years ago. I was already training hundreds of women on what is violence, what kind of violence they could, how they could stop, how could they interrupt. So, like, I was already speaking German fluidly. I was. It's really
having
hard.
your network.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to think. Well, I went to live to a different city. I studied in Switzerland, but I didn't come to Switzerland to live by then. But it's really hard to say, no, it happens only to women that are not educated, they don't access the language, they don't have resources. I was educated. I've studied in Switzerland and I've studied in Austria before I married him. And when I married him, I ended up being a victim of domestic violence. And then I realized if this could happen to me, knowing the topic, being knowledgeable, having experience, this can happen to anyone. So I wouldn't say there is a certain profile where victims fall. I would say really it's certain conditions that happen in these circumstances. For instance, being in a country that is not yours. Even though you speak the language, you still are in a vulnerability situation.
Do you think the cultural background plays a role too? I mean, maybe in your country, domestic violence, it's a bit more acceptable than women from, because I know both are from Latin America. There it's more a normality to be beaten. So.
Not at all. Not at all. Like, I grew up in a family where my father would cook and would do anything. Both are well educated, both have been traveling in the world. Like, I wouldn't say I've experienced this and therefore I am more familiar with situations of domestic violence. Of course, I work with the issue, I work with the topic, but not from a point of view that it makes me familiar with the issue that I can accept myself. Actually, if I became an activist, like 11 years ago I founded an NGO, is because I absolutely reject this issue, and I think it's something we have to work every day, all the stakeholders, authorities, civil society, and so that's what is shocking, right? Like, because I was actually against it. I was raised in a way that I have to stand for my rights. So when I come here to Europe and I end up with this guy who makes me think I have no value at all, I'm useless for anything, I've really...
So he started first with the psychological violence and this increase and this
to
scale.
the point that I wouldn't eat for 2 weeks at his place, so I had to run away. But no, the thing is, and what is important here to mention is that regardless the position of women, and regardless education, and wherever country you're coming from, because I wouldn't say there is much more violence or domestic violence in Latin America than in Europe. I wouldn't say so, because I've studied here, I've lived here like the last 10 years. I would never say that. So I can just say it doesn't matter. You can be European, even not in these international binational relationships. You could be European, living with a European, having the same culture, the same values, and still end up being a victim.
Thank you very much. Speaking about women which are coming here and from other country, and they find out that maybe the guy, which is the husband, use them to prostitute. That it's very interesting. Do you think that domestic violence goes hand in hand with in this situation?
Yes, and if I could say, if I could mention a profile, I would say a white man, rich, very well educated, sometimes not, but he had all the chances to be, because here you have the chances. And this guy, he's extremely, he has lots of prejudice against people from other countries and continents, and he uses his power to make these women work for him, to humiliate these women. So I think lots of prejudice are at stake in this context. And I have seen this case of making the women to work as a prostitute in 3 interviews. It's unbelievable.
The same culture or different cultures?
2 Swiss. 3 Swiss.
Out of
Swiss.
Very
out of
interesting.
50 couples.
19.
No, out of the 35 long interviews.
Okay. Wow. 3 is a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Where victims can find more help? We spoke about police, but exists another organization where they can address?
Well, there is this website, opferhilfeschweiz.ch, which means Victim Help Switzerland.ch. You can find a platform there where you can find a lot of languages available. So you click on your language and you can access loads of information, a phone number from your canton where you can access some help. They provide you with legal support and psychological support. But it's also important that if you can access what you just said, if you can access internet, if you have your phone, if you have some 5 minutes spending on internet, make sure you find out who could help you. Like, there are a lot of civil society institutions or state institutions that are financed by government or by private people to help women in such situation. So you just make sure, look for help on the internet, make a screenshot or write down the number, and whenever you go through something like that, don't feel embarrassed and just call and ask for help.
Liliana, you know any kind of institution which can help people in this situation? I understand that you know one.
I could say as well, I could add the www.bnational.ch, sorry, because they are a service here in Switzerland, and they can even advise couples. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's from the government. It's not for free, but it's subsidized. And they have good advice. I interviewed one of the ladies that worked there in Bern, here in Bern, and she was explaining lots of issues that they tackle when they advise binational couples.
I understand that you had another interview with Pastor Vicente Medeiros about his project, Rescue Project. Can you tell us a bit more, and after we can see the video and the interview with him?
Pastor Vicente is a Brazilian. He has this project in Zurich, and he helps migrants who are in vulnerability. It could be a man, a woman, it doesn't have to be Brazilian. And even he works outside Switzerland as well. And normally he deals a lot with domestic violence and human trafficking, including children. And he helps these people. He really rescues these people, and he helps to get a ticket back to Brazil. He puts these women in houses specialized in protection. And he has lots of stories, lots of sad stories about this horrible thing that human being can do against another one.
Despite of all the help you mentioned and the support people can have here in Switzerland, Pastor Vicente Medeiros mentioned in his storytelling the challenges people can face here in Switzerland when they arrive. Let's listen to him.
Yeah. One horrible case that we had here, that we heard about, was a lady. She was brought again to be married, to marry someone, and when she get there, was prostitution. And the man said, look, just change clothes, clients will start to come. And it started, but she was doing that crying. And the person used to say, no, I'm gonna be nice with you, just relax. Because this is something that I didn't know up to that time. Some men, they pay much more to have sex with a woman who are not a prostitution, but he is the one who is going to introduce to prostitution. So, and she was crying for the man, and that's what he wanted, a lady crying, suffering. But she never was cured, because every time that she was to have to do that she was crying. And one day she said, one very nice man said, look, I see that you are unhappy here. So if you want, I can take you out of this life. I can even marry with you. Then you don't have to do this anymore. And I help you to run away from here. And she said, okay. And she married that person. The guy really took her away from that place. And she said, but you need to know my family. So she went to Brazil and met the family, and they got married. When that man, he brought her back to Switzerland, he was a pimp. And he put her in prostitution again.
Pastor Vicente is a Brazilian. He has this project in Zurich, and he helps migrants who are in vulnerability. It could be a man, a woman, it doesn't have to be Brazilian. And even he works outside Switzerland as well. And normally he deals a lot with domestic violence and human trafficking, including children. And he helps these people. He really rescues these people, and he helps to get a ticket back to Brazil. He puts these women in houses specialized in protection. And he has lots of stories, lots of sad stories about this horrible thing that human being can do against another one.
Thank you very much, ladies, for the good input and for the information you bring today in this talk show. And I would like to thank as well to our technical team here in Diaspora TV and to you, dear viewers, for listening to us. Have a nice day. Thank you.